Alright, so after a bit of a hiatus here, I'm coming back to work on this cab area. I'm going to clean it up, use a wire brush, use this can of white Rust-Oleum here to get this surface painted, after which I'm going to get some plywood in place. And I have my Airline L-Track that'll be used to mount my wife's co-pilot seat, or I might be in the co-pilot seat if she drives. It'll be on each side of the stairwell here, and there's going to be a platform across that slides on the airline track, so fabrication work involved there. But the first step here is just to paint, and I'm going to get the plywood put in place with the airline track sort of carved into the plywood sections, after this is painted. So paint first. So right now I'm in the process of removing this galvanized material from the stairwell. I'm going to actually remove all the treads. I want to make sure the metal underneath is solid and painted, and I may have to reinforce it, most likely with plywood, but we'll see what it needs. So anyway, I'm taking this off. Some of the screws are being stubborn. I might have to get the angle grinder out. The most prolifically used tool in Skoolie building. So anyway, we'll see what we can do to get this thing out. So I've been doing some tidying up of the bus. I know it looks like chaos, but trying to organize all the tools. And then I trimmed back some of the old vinyl there by the edge of the electrical cabinet panel there. Now I'm removing the metal and breaking the treads off here in the stairwell. These will get redone depending on the quality of the actual metal here. I may have to weld something, but we'll see. Looks pretty good for now. Don't know about the bottom step, but this further inside one here looks pretty decent. So I'm trying to break off this old vinyl for the stair treads, and I'm sweating. It's hard work. Okay, so that was not easy. I got that first tread off. Looks like this is in pretty good shape. Actually, it should just be able to be scuffed up and painted, and then I'll make it look pretty later. I'm leaning toward leaving this bottom, well, taking this one out, but leaving this bottom tread in place, and I'll paint it over with a bed liner, I think. I'll have to see if that'll stick to it. That makes sense to me because it's going to be hard to remove it with the bus door in the way, and then the thickness of whatever I put in I'd have to be careful with, and so on and so forth. It also has the lines to kind of drain things out, which is a good thing. So it's not really in bad shape. I think I'm going to just cover that bottom step with the bed liner. But we're going to take this second one out. Alright, got that shroud off. That's probably where most of the salty, muddy boots from thousands of school kids flung their muck. Got rusted a little bit. There's some rust in the metal behind it, but nothing, doesn't look too bad. Okay, got that second main part of the step there off. You can see that's a bit more rusty in there. I'll have to grind through it to see how substantial it is. It should still be fine to just paint and put wood over top, but we will see. This is hard to do. Of course, the fasteners are all rusted out, so you can't get all of them with a drill, Phillips head. So I've been having to use this wrecking bar here to pop these up, and it's not easy. These are awfully thick vinyl. About let's say probably about 3/8 thick, maybe even 1/4. So pretty hard to do. And this is what I look like, all sweaty and frizzy. So anyway, I'm going to keep going, but quite a bit of rust on that second step. So we'll get that vacuumed out and see how we look after a wire wheel. Okay, and I got that bottom bit of galvanized out as well. This looks pretty dirty and gross, but I don't think the metal's in that bad a shape, so maybe that spot. We'll see if I have to patch anything before I put wood down, but right now the order of business is to wire wheel the front cab, and then we'll shop vac it up. I'm going to get my dust mask on and get that angle grinder moving. Alright, so I'm making some progress here. I'm working from the door in. I'll exit through the side door and shut the lights off. It's pretty dark out here. But anyway, just using chip brush. This will all get covered with other material. This is a protective coat. Keep it from rusting. And there it is. Got the cab floor painted. Looks a mite bit better than it did. But nobody's going to see it anyway when it's done. It's definitely going to keep it from rusting though. So that's the good news. That's what we were going for. Anyway, I'm done for the night. So right now I'm at the house. I'm running my metal cutting saw here to cut these aluminum airline tracks into the right dimensions for the cab area. I'm going to have some shorter pieces to put the driver's seat mounting on, just so it's easy to remove. And then we're going to have longer pieces. There's another cut mark here. That'll be the slide over the wheel well, the stairwell I meant, for the co-pilot chair. So I'm going to make these cuts and then we'll go to the bus. So I'm at the bus. I've got these cut pieces. This track will lay along this lip. This track will lay right there, not far from where the dashboard, or the, I guess we'll call it the dashboard, will get built down. There'll be an air handling arrangement here for the defroster, diesel heater right in here, and probably some storage over this way. And that storage will be accessible from inside or outside, just for odds and ends. Anyway, so I've got these tracks here. I went and got some 1/8" steel plate and some square tubing to reinforce that. My next step here is to fabricate the steel plate so that it can attach to these rails. I want to make sure that the rails are in the exact perfect position before I fasten them to the bus. And to do that, I'm going to use that steel plate arrangement and this square edge here of the driver area. And that way I'll be able to position this appropriately. I've also got these shorter rails that the driver's seat will mount on. So what we have here is 1/8" steel plate. I have it cut at 24 by 32. I should have probably gone a little wider than 32, but it is what it is. I also have some 3/4 square tubing that'll serve to reinforce this on the top. There'll be 2 pieces at 32 and then some pieces at 22.5 going across. So that way we've got good structure to support it. And then the knobs will go here and about here, you know, and then over here and over here, and they'll be nicely supported by that tubing. And we'll clean up the edges, make them nice. Probably put a little bit of a rounding on the corners so they're not pokey. Wire brush it, get it nice and painted when it's done being fabricated. And right here in the center, maybe a little bit further back, is going to be the passenger seat or co-pilot chair. I have to think about where it's going to be positioned. I'll probably bring the chair in to set it on this while it's just kind of roughly sitting here, and get a feel for where it will be relative to the driver's seat. So we'll get both chairs in position with an approximation kind of to figure out where they're going to be. And they'll be adjustable. You know, there's going to be slide track on both of them, move forward and back. And there's also swivel bases. So chairs will be fully adjustable. Hopefully they won't be too tall. That's my one concern right now, especially on the driver's seat, is that it'll rise too much. So I might have to shorten the base, but we'll figure it out. And that's where it'll sit as far as the seat base goes when it's slid in. So we can kind of walk up the stairwell and see where I'm at here and still be able to get into the bus, avoiding the seat. So I think this will work out nicely. We won't typically have to move the seat, and what we'll probably do is just slide it forward a little bit when we're parked. So anyhow, I'm going to keep moving on this. I think this plan will come together nicely. So I measured the width of the rail. The micrometer here is telling me, or not micrometer, the vernier caliper is telling me it's 1.3875 inches. So I'll divide that by 2, and that's the measurement off the edges that we're going to use for where we're going to drill the holes for those knobs to go through. So what we're actually going to do is drill it to the size of the locking mechanism. We're going to weld the locking mechanism to the plate on the bottom, and that's going to allow us to have the plate be lifted up with the chair to slide it. If I don't have the plate welded to those, they'll be loose, and then we'll never get the thing loose when we're trying to slide it, lift it up and take pressure off of it and slide it out of the way. Because those are actually what hold things to the track, is those little round pieces. I don't know if you can see them under the knobs. So that'll become part of the plate on this setup. Not so much on that one. That one they'll just sit underneath because I'm not going to anticipate taking it and sliding it very often. So I used my caliper and tape measure and the rule there, and I've drawn a center line down the middle here with the rule, but I've also drawn a line where the holes are going to go for these clamping mechanisms, and I've drawn a cross mark where I'm going to put pilot holes in. These parts here are 1-inch discs of metal. They're 1 inch diameter, so I'm going to drill a 1-inch hole. I will have the plate with 1-inch holes welded to these with a little bit of lift on the bottom. So I'm going to put a little metal in between the bottom and the plate when I weld it, and I'll be tacking these in place while they're clamped down to the rail, and that way they're actually going to be perfect. So we'll put some tack welds in while they're clamped down, not with these plastic knobs. I'll use the bolts, the nuts themselves, so I don't melt the knobs. But that way the holes will be perfectly aligned. And we're going to do all that before we put the square tubing in with tack welds. And we'll be careful not to warp the whole thing with too much heat from the welder. So that is the game plan for this, to fabricate this this piece of metal. And my goal is that it's going to line up perfectly with the edges of the rails and have a little bit of a, we're going to have a little bit of a cutoff on this in the corner, or I'll be careful to smooth the edges as best I can. That's probably more likely. I'll leave it 32 inches but smooth the edges. That way it's not a weird end. So we got the square tubing I'll show you here in a bit. Alright, so out of my assortment of hole saws, I found the one that's just a tiny bit over 1 inch. So it's a 1-inch hole saw, but it's actually very slightly bigger. That'll allow just enough slop here as we position things. So we're going to go ahead and get the pilot holes drilled, and go ahead and drill these holes in this 1/8-inch steel carefully. I'll have to get some cutting oil for the blade. So I've got the pilot holes drilled. Now this one's a little further over because this track doesn't go all the way to the door or the wall over here. So it's 10 inches over, which would be about this second hole. So at this point I've got the 4 holes drilled for this to be piloted in, and this I'm going to be really careful not to break that bit, but it's going to drill 1-inch holes in the steel. I've got some cutting fluid over in the box over there, so we use that to kind of keep it from having a problem. Well, they don't make hole saws like I expect them to. See how bent that shaft is in the pilot? Ridiculous. I had piloted it already and I was being gentle, and it still bent itself just trying to get through the steel. So probably end up buying a new one of those unless I can find one of my metric ones that's close enough. I think I have a 26 metric. I'll have to take a peek. So anyhow, I'm really not very happy with the quality of a lot of our modern tools sold in box stores. They're just complete garbage. So I've been pretty disappointed on this whole project with a lot of the wear tools that I've bought, like bits. So it is what it is, though. There's the first hole through. It's going to be a little bigger than 1 inch because of the wobble. This pilot is a little smaller than the other one on this bent piece of crap from Lennox. Ought to be ashamed of yourself selling this junk. But anyway, this is an Amazon metric one. I was careful with it, but it did wobble a little bit. Hopefully it won't do that on this pilot hole. So we'll put some cutting fluid on and do the next one here. Alright, that's 2 holes cut with this cheap Amazon metric hole saw. So now I got to get the other 2 done over here. Alright, so I got all 4 holes drilled here. 1, 2 in the back, 3, 4 in the front. And it'll be time at this point to clean up and head home. I'll come back at it tomorrow. Back at it here another day. The next step here, since I've drilled the holes, is to align everything on the track. And I'm going to try to get the round parts here tack welded to the plate. That way they will be able to slide. When you lift up the seat a little bit, it'll slide on the track. So at least that's my theory. I hope it works. So anyway, I'm going to get this kind of set up in place, and then I'll shim it so that they're level. Then I'll set up the welder and get things tack welded. So the holes I drilled lined up nicely at this stage anyway. I'm going to put the nuts on these, but I think I'm actually going to slide this a little further this way, more toward the center of the rails. That way I can measure and block this before I weld. I'll use some hopefully I have room for bar clamps. But anyway, I want to make sure that the rails are perfectly even, parallel when I weld them, or when I weld these on, so that we've got a no problems when it slides. I want it to slide freely. So I think I'm going to move this over a little bit, closer to the middle. That way I can put a piece of stock on that side out of wood, and then over this way in the stairwell for spacer blocks. Once I have that done, I may actually wire those in place. I got to figure out if a bar clamp will be too long for the space with the front in the way and the steps in the way over here. A bar clamp would be ideal, but we'll see. I just want to make sure that the frames are exactly parallel when I tack weld these pieces together. I also need to clean the oil off the material before I do that. I'll probably take it out and degrease it and dry it and then wire wheel it and so on before I put the welds in. Alright, so I just used the table saw to make these spacer sticks at 29 3/8. So these will go onto those rails to keep things parallel. So I've got this rusty piece of, I believe it's 14 gauge. I'm going to wire brush it, then use the angle grinder to cut some shims, and they'll go under nearby where I'm going to tack these in place. So that'll lift these up a little bit so they're even, and so that this metal plate doesn't drag when we're sliding it. So that's the plan. Alright, so just use the angle grinder to cut these shims. Going to be one at each post here, just to keep the plate from being on the rail. The next step here is to tighten down these nylock nuts that came with the L-track studs. And we'll do that on all 4. That way they're fully locked down when we go to weld them. What I'm actually going to do after I do this layout in here is I'll take the pieces into the shop to do the welding with these spacers in place. I'm doing this part in here just to kind of make sure that I like the layout. I am going to need to trim this back a little bit, but I don't want to not have that screw hole in place, so I'll probably round it off or cut it at a slight angle here and then straight this way. We'll see what I do, but I don't want it to be I don't want it to lose that hold there of that bolt. So anyway, I'm going to continue here putting these nuts in place. Once I have everything locked down, the next step will be to take this all to the shop and get the welder set up to tack it. I'm going to have to degrease from my cutting oil, probably with some just standard degreaser, dry it off, wire wheel it with the angle grinder, get it good and scuffed up, and then I'll be able to put some tacks in, just sufficient to hold everything in place. And then I'm going to start on the edges, laying them out as far as the cross bracing and support. I'm going to have to get the seat base, figure out how I'm setting that up. I'm thinking I'm going to weld the seat base to the plate, just plug weld it in place. That's the swivel base. I just need to make sure I like the positioning of it. That'll probably be based on the center line of the driver's seat, so they both can be sort of in line with one another. I may do that layout ahead of time. I think I should actually do that layout ahead of time, as best I can in here before I go fabricate. So anyhow, gonna bolt this down. Okay, so I have the nuts locking the L-track studs in place. What I can do now is take all this into the shop. I'm going to lay it out after I clean the steel and brush, create a brushed surface for the welds to stick to on these circular pieces and the steel. We're going to get the grease off, maybe a couple cleanings of that. I might even use a little bit of vinegar or some other acid wash near the holes. And at that point, I'll dry it off, and then I'll be ready to set it up in the shop and tack it. So that is the next thing we're going to do. Alright, so my brother fortunately had some brake cleaner laying around, so I'm cleaning the areas I'm going to weld with brake cleaner and shop towel. I'm going to do that a couple times. It'll evaporate off nicely. I won't even have to get it wet, so that should work pretty well. What I'm doing right now is I'm going to run the angle grinder, and I'm going to scuff up the outer edges of these locking rings so that the weld bead will take hold on them. So that's what I'm getting at right here. Alright, so I've scuffed up the edges. You can see most of the coating is off of them, so they'll weld up good that way. So the next move here is to run this wire wheel on the parts that I'm going to weld to rough up the surface. Okay, so at this point I have the shims in place, got the spacers in place. I'm going to go get some bar clamps and bar clamp each side so they're perfectly parallel. I'm going to take a measurement from the end of each piece here to the metal and make sure that they're even, down to probably a millimeter of accuracy. And then we'll put the bar clamps in place and we'll be ready to tack weld this up. After that, I'm going to lay out the reinforcements and I'm going to tack them in place as well. Okay, so I have the bar clamps in place holding everything together. These are within a millimeter or two, probably 2 millimeters of each other, measured from the edge of the metal. That could be an irregularity in the metal. Probably should actually measure from the center of the bolt, but that's kind of hard to do. I think we're okay with that. It's just probably cosmetic. Also well, that's probably manufactured to that tolerance, so they're probably matching on the factory ends, but I could check that as well. So I think it's close enough. I'm going to go ahead and tack this in place. Okay, so I'm about to don the helmet and tack this sucker up. Okay, so I tacked those with some flux core wire. We'll wire brush it and see how it looks. Let it cool off. And then hopefully I can turn the nuts still, get them off. I may have, put a little bead in the way. I might have to grind a little bead out to get the nuts off the studs there, but should be okay. So anyway, we'll see if I can turn those nuts now. And we'll wire brush things, clean it up a bit. Alright, so I managed to get the nuts off. I did have to do a little bit of grinding, but the studs are loose. I'm going to take this track out of here, and then I'm going to weld the back side, and then I'll be able to clean up the front side, weld the bead and clean it up. So anyhow, that's what I'm up to next. Okay, so I'm going to grind this up real quick with the wire wheel, and then I'll put a perimeter. You can see there's a little bit of a lip there if it focuses. I'm going to put a bead around that lip on the inside here, on each of the four lock nuts, I'll call them. I don't know, they're lock discs, whatever. Okay, so I flipped these over. I did a weld all the way around. Now I'm going to get the grinding wheel and clean these up flush. Hopefully I have filled the crease. If not, I'll come back and touch it up, grind again, touch it up, etc. So we're going to get the grinding wheel going now. Okay, so on my ugly weld here, flux core has a lot of splatter, by the way. I've got, on the other side of this one here, I damaged that a bit with some welding bead. And I'm going to use the grinding wheel to try to get that back to its normal shape as best I can. So I think it'll work out okay. I just got to delicately grind away at it. So I'm grinding it back to fairly close to the same shape. I see I need to take a little bit more off right there. Alright, so I've ground the first one down nice and smooth. It's kind of hard to tell, maybe right in here where that part joins, you know, the circular piece of this steel. So that'll be sufficient. Bottom's a bit uglier, but I don't really care because it's not going to be seen. So I'm going to get the other three ground down like that. Okay, it's pretty dark out. I think I have the, yeah, I'm going to take the seat base and these reinforcement bars over. Had the middle yard cut these to the right size already. So I'm going to clamp them in place and tack them to the seat platform. This will give that platform rigidity. So that's what's next. Alright, so on the center line I've positioned the swivel base, and it's going to help me, it'll help me position other things later. I've got to figure out where it's going front to back, but I do know that I'll be putting the first pieces in long ways, and then we'll have 3 inches in, we'll have another cross piece, and then once I figure out where the swivel base is actually going, that's going to most likely that'll dictate where the other cross braces go. Probably right in front and back of the swivel base. Alright, so I've got this 3/4 tubing clamped in place on the edges. There's 4 of these that'll bridge in the middle. This one's going to be up about 3 inches from the edge. It'll help reinforce these holes for strength. We're going to tack them in place, at least on the edges for now. Tack here, middle, side, etc. That is the plan anyway. And once I can free up some clamps, I'll start on this one. Okay, so I've got this quickly tacked in place to start with. I'm going to put some other tacks at the far side now and in the middle, just to keep these rails where they need to be. Okay, so that's where I'm finishing for tonight. I've got the square tubing tacked in place, and the next thing will be to take all this into the bus and to mount the rails to the floor. Make sure this thing slides properly. I'm going to initially just drill rivet holes and make sure it slides properly. Hopefully it does. And that way, if it doesn't, it'll be easy enough to just drill out the rivets on each end. And those rivets will not be in the way of the sliding mechanism. They'll be at the far ends. So then I'll test the sliding. If it's good, then I'll finish welding all this up. So that's the plan. So I'm at the bus here. It's Sunday of Labor Day weekend. I am right now finding the center between the old driver's seat fasteners. I want to try to extend center lines so that when I mount the swivel for the co-pilot chair that both seats are aligned. So I'm kind of using this square to get fairly close here as far as the alignment goes. Once I mount the rails with the base plate in place, I'll be able to transfer that over to the base plate, and then I'll have a centerline marking on the base plate for the co-pilot chair. Might not be perfect, but it'll be close enough for what we're trying to do here, within a couple millimeters anyway. not noticeable if we're slightly off. Okay, so I have this kind of set up with the spacing sticks. I have it clamped down, lined up with the edge here. And the next step here is going to be to go ahead and put a couple fasteners in. I'll probably drill new holes and just use some self-tappers. I'll drill slightly smaller pilot hole. Use some self-tapping screws on the ends just to be able to hold these rails in place. Then we'll test the locking function in different areas of the track and see how that goes. Okay, so I threw a self-tapper in each end, and now we're going to test the slide, make sure it locks down properly. So being parallel is key here, within margin of error, I guess. Okay, so it slides and locks down just fine. It's probably likely that this kind of a position will be the most likely position when we're riding down the road. The reason is we might want to open the door actually while we're driving to let a lot of air in, or at least have it part way open. As far as our puppy dogs go, we're going to have this area closed off with another door, so it might be nice to get fresh air in this way, and would still allow the door to open if we want to quickly exit without moving the seat. So that's probably the position she'll be in as the co-pilot, or if she's driving, I'll be in. Now I just have to line up on that mark the center line for a seat support or swivel, and that way we'll be in line with our seats. I intend, like I said, to put a breakfast sort of or dining table, playing card table, whatever, right in the middle between the seats. It'll likely lock down with another one of these, or with a lagoon mount, depending on what I do with the dashboard structure. There may be enough meat there to put a lagoon mount in. I may put a metal tab coming up, strong metal elbow to hold that mount. We'll see. So anyway, it's coming along nicely, right to plan. I'm going to go ahead and get the center line marked and figure out where the swivel base is going to go. And on this one, I'm leaning toward the idea of welding the swivel base to the plate. That's what I think I'm going to do. So we'll see. Alright, so I transferred the center line measurement so that both swivel bases can be mounted in the same spot in terms of center line. It gives lots of leg room up front, and a safety mechanism for if there was an accident to be thrown forward and not hit the windshield. So, although in a bus this big, if you hit that hard, you got other problems. So, anyway, I am gonna set that base right there down, and I'll mark its edges. That will inform where to put the other cross supports in. I think it's going to be one in front and then another one in front. So there'll be, plenty of support. The base itself strengthens that middle section. So once I have those layouts marked, I'm going to wire brush this, being careful not to remove my marks for the important parts of the base, and then we'll be able to weld it all up. So that is the plan. Okay, so what we have here looks like it's not going to be perfectly centered right there, because I can't get all the way back with it because of the welding beads. But that'll be close enough. I don't think it's going to even be noticeable at that stage. We're dealing with less than 1/4 of an inch here, probably 3/16-ish. So that'll work out. So the plan right now is to mark the line in front, right here, where we're going to put the other piece of steel in place, and then we'll tack that in place, and then we'll be able to weld beads. I'm going to rough up the metal all the way around, and then also in here, and we'll plug weld this in place right here with a nice bit of bead all the way through. Do it in stages to cool off the metal. We're going to grind that up with whatever, and then similarly we'll clean up the edges here and get this to where I can weld it to the plate. And then once I have the other 3/4 tubing in place, it'll weld as well to the tubing, and then we'll do the same thing back here. So just got to get the lines marked for fabricating, and then I'm going to mark a line for the tube in between these two. I'm just going to make it equidistant from the between the two tubes, one here, there'll be one in the center. So that is the plan. Okay, here's the setup with the front bar. I've got the lines marked for it on the edge. We'll go ahead and get this thing welded up at this point. I'm going to use the wire weld to clean things up. What I'll probably do is first just tack the seat in place before I wire wheel, just to make it so I don't have a problem. But you know, after that's done, then we'll wire wheel the rest and get this thing fully welded and supported. So anyhow, that's the plan. I do want to check real quick to make sure that I haven't miscalculated with the actual seat as far as its mounting and how far back it goes and so on. I just want to kind of eyeball it by bringing it in here, setting it on this roughly, and kind of seeing how it would appear. Make sure it's not going to hit this back wood or anything like that. So anyhow, that is the next step. Actually, it's just to sanity check my process here with the actual seat. So I pulled this passenger side seat out. I'm going to measure the dimensions on the bolts and see what we've got to do to make them fit. I don't know if these are already slide mechanisms. I don't know if the seat base that I have already fits on this, or if I've got to fabricate some runners to drill holes to make it fit properly. So might be a little more fab work, but we'll see. I'm going to go grab a seat base and see if it lines up. Okay, so what we've got going on here is that it looks like the holes actually will accommodate the dimension this way, but I'm going to need to get some tubing or some thick plate and drill holes to build an adapter plate coming off that base. So that's the next step here. But the other thing I need to be aware of is the actual height of the seat, especially for the driver position, to make sure that it's a comfortable height. So it may take some fiddling. I'm going to go ahead and initially just use some tubing I already have. I think I have some 2-inch tubing, and I'm going to see if that's too thick or not, but I might need to get a little more material to finish the plan here. So actually I've decided for the driver's seat I'm going to actually use threaded rod, and I'm going to make it so that it's going to be a little longer. I'm going to make it so the height can be adjusted with threaded rod that goes through these holes into a plate that goes across, or tubing that goes across. So that's how I'm going to handle the driver's seat adjustment. So that just occurred to me. I'll be able to space it out with some nuts. It won't be something you'd want to adjust all the time, but my wife and I are about the same height, so it should work out okay. I got to measure the actual height of that driver's seat to get a feel for what the spacing would probably need to be here. So, but this is the passenger seat. Clearly I need to make an adapter. So that's what I'm going to do, is figure out those dimensions and get some tubing to make that adapter plate. Okay, so I'm using this rule here to figure out that if I allow for about 6 inches minimum, we should be fine as far as spacing behind this edge of the seat swivel. So when I put this back on the plate, I can make sure I have that clearance. I think I have no problem there, but we'll see. I'm going to kind of try to measure to make sure it doesn't hit the steps and so on. Okay, so actually I had to readjust things a little bit. I didn't realize that I had the seat a little bit misplaced. That brace for forward motion for sudden stops is supposed to be in the front. So anyway, I'm going to measure. I clearly have more than 6 inches of space here, but I'm going to measure it on a swivel to see if on a diagonal I still have 6 inches to the step, just to make sure the seat doesn't have a problem. Okay, so what this is telling me, the seat's roughly 24 inches wide. I've centered it at 12 here. It might bump the wood if it's not slid forward, but the seat has a built-in slide. So as long as I round the corners nicely, which would be a safety issue anyway on the base plate for the seat, we slide it forward, it would be out of the way if we want to swivel it. So anyhow, I think we're okay with this positioning. I'm going to go ahead and go for it. Okie dokie, so I'm ready to wire brush this side and get everything tacked in place with the seat base, and so time to weld. I'm going to get a little bit of a cooling off here before I start welding. Okay, so I have the seat base ready to tack in place. I've got everything wire wheeled and clean metal surfaces to work with, so I'm going to go ahead and get the welder going and tack this sucker in place. Okay, here's where I've finished before I ran out of welding wire. I'm going to have to go get some more flux core wire here. But I've got it tacked down for sure. And after I've got a good bead all the way around, after getting more wire, I'll grind it and make it smooth and look better. So I want to get a nice bead across the whole edge here all the way around, and then we'll get a piece in here as well of the 3/4 tube. So after doing some ugly but structurally sound welding here, I've put some caps on the end of these, so I'm going to grind those down. Right now I'm cutting pieces of wood, and these are going to kind of fill the spaces on the inside. They'll be sealed in with adhesive caulk, and then all of this is going to get coated in a bed liner once it's nice and smooth and sealed. So anyway, I'm going to continue cutting this wood stuff, and then we'll move everything out to the pavilion. I'm going to clean up the grinding. You know, I might clean these up a bit. I filled in a spot where the weld needed added to here on this one. So I'm going to run the grinder, wire wheel everything to a nice finish. Then I'll be gluing the wood in place, and then we'll prime everything, after which I'm going to put the bed liner down on everything up underneath the seat here to about right there. It'll be in truck bed liner in black, but I'm going to fill in all the voids with an adhesive caulk, let that dry first, and then similarly we'll glue these pieces of wood in place. And when we're done, it won't really be apparent that there's wood, hopefully. Yeah, it seems to be the right height, so give or take, you know, a slight amount. It might be apparent the wood's there, but anyway, so hopefully it all will look pretty even in the end. Alright, so I've cut the wood pieces for the fill, and at this point I'm going to take all this out to the pavilion and I'm going to grind it, wire wheel it, clean it up. We'll put a coat of primer on things, and after that dries, well, actually I might just wire wheel it, glue this in place, and then prime everything after the caulk has dried. That's what I'm going to do. There's no need to prime the metal that is going to be glued underneath the wood. Alright, so I've got this sufficiently ground that now I can wipe it with acetone, and I'll be able to glue the wood in place, and then I'm going to prime everything after the wood's put in place. It's going in place with an adhesive caulk, and that should be sufficient to keep it tacked down. Alright, so I'm going to wipe this down with brake parts cleaner. It evaporates and leaves no residue. After that, I'm going to glue the wood in place, and using an adhesive caulk for that, and then I'm going to cover that with primer before leaving. That is the plan. I do have one more spot to grind over here, but right after that I'll be wiping things down. Now it's all clean. I'm going to smear caulk in the bottom, then I'm going to run a bead at the edges to squish up when I push the wood down, and we'll get 4 pieces of wood stuck in here. After that, I'm going to add more caulk to smooth out any areas that need filled. I will let that, might let that dry before painting. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So, anyhow, I'm going to get going here with the gluing. Okay, so the reason I went with an adhesive caulk is that the metal and wood are going to expand at a different rate in the temperature and I wanted to make sure that they didn't separate with a traditional glue. This will have a little bit of flexibility but still remain very sticky. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and spread this with that plastic scraper and get a thin coat there, and we'll stick the wood down, and then we'll put caulk in the edges. Alright, so I've got the wood positioned. Next thing I'm going to do is go through the edges of the wood, and I'm going to fill them in with the adhesive caulk, and then we'll smooth this out. Alright, so I've spread caulk all over this and created a little bit of a sculpted pattern. Once this is dry overnight, I'm going to prime it, and then I'm going to cover the whole thing in Rust-Oleum bed liner. So this is paintable caulk. I use the adhesive caulk underneath, and the top is an acrylic caulk. So we'll let that dry. That should give it a nice kind of spongy feel with the bed liner, and should allow for some traction. So anyhow, I'm going to let this cure. It'll look better than this when it's done. You won't be able to see the irregularities as well, but I just kind of did some scallops, and that's where we're finishing for the evening. Okay, so back at it here on bus work. This caulk is dried. I'm actually surprised with how much rust came up. It must have been a reaction with the chemistry of the caulk, but we're going to get this primed, and once that's dried, I'll put bed liner over it. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint the bottom. Then I'll be able to flip it over, set it on some sticks, and that shouldn't interfere too much with the bottom. Okay, so I put a coat on the bottom. Now I've flipped it over. It's resting on the protrusions which go in the L track, so the paint hopefully won't be disturbed there. So now I'm going to paint the top. Okay, so now I have the primer coat on the top. We're going to let this dry, and then I will coat the top with the bed liner paint, Rust-Oleum bed liner, also brushed on. I think it looks pretty good, hell of a lot better than it did with just the caulk, and the surface is maintaining some texture. I wanted that for grip. I didn't want it to be slippery.